place in the world was my grandma's house. It wasn't a big house, but it was always warm and smelled like fresh bread. Every time I walked through her door, she would be there, waiting with a big smile and open arms. "Come here, my sweet," she would say. I would run into her arms, and she would hold me tight. Her hugs were always the best. They made me feel safe and loved. No matter how sad or tired I was, one hug from her made everything better. My grandma's house was a magical place. It was full of old things, like pictures and books. She would tell me stories about when she was young. She would sit with me for hours, telling me about her life and the things she learned. I loved listening to her, and I always felt like I was learning something special. Chapter 2: The Best Cook in the World. My grandma was also the best cook in the world. At least, that's what I thought. Every weekend, I would visit her, and she would always have something special waiting for me. Sometimes it was her famous soup, or her homemade cookies. The smell would fill the house, and I couldn't wait to eat. One day, when I was about 8 years old, I asked her if I could help her cook. She smiled and said, "Of course, dear. Let's make something delicious together." We spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen. She showed me how to knead the dough for bread and how to mix the ingredients for cookies. My hands were small, and I wasn't very good at it, but she didn't mind. She laughed and said, "You'll get better with practice." When the cookies were done, she let me taste the first one. It was warm, soft, and tasted like love. We sat together at the table, eating cookies and talking. I felt so proud that I helped her. She made me believe that I could do anything. Chapter 3: Grandma's Garden of Love. In my grandma's backyard, there was a small garden. It wasn't very big, but it was full of beautiful flowers and plants. Every spring, she would plant new seeds, and by summer, the garden would be alive with color. One day, she took me outside and handed me a little packet of seeds. "These are special," she said. "They need love and care to grow, just like people." We planted the seeds together, and every day I would water them. At first, nothing happened, and I started to lose hope. But my grandma said, "Be patient. Good things take time." A few weeks later, the seeds began to sprout. I was so excited, and I ran to tell her. She smiled and said, "See? With a little love and patience, beautiful things grow." That lesson stayed with me. It wasn't just about the plants. My grandma was teaching me about life. She was teaching me that with care and patience, good things will come, even if we can't see them right away. Chapter 4: The Storyteller. My grandma loved telling stories. Every night before bed, she would tell me a story. Sometimes they were fairy tales, but other times, they were stories about her own life. I loved hearing about her childhood, about how things were so different back then. One night, I asked her, "Grandma, what's the most important thing you learned in life?" She thought for a moment and then said, "The most important thing I learned is that love is the most powerful thing in the world. If you love and care for the people around you, you will always be rich, even if you don't have money." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time, but as I grew older, I realized how true her words were. My grandma's love was like a light that shined on everyone around her. She didn't have a lot of money, but she had a big heart, and that made her rich. Chapter 5: The Hard Goodbye. As the years went by, my grandma started to slow down. She wasn't as strong as she used to be, and sometimes she forgot things. It was hard for me to see her like that because she had always been so full of life. One day, she became very sick, and we had to take her to the hospital. I was scared. I didn't want to lose her. I sat by her bed, holding her hand, just like she had held mine when I was little. She looked at me and smiled, even though she was weak. "Don't be sad, my sweet," she said softly. "I've had a good life. And I will always be with you, in your heart." Those were some of the last words she said to me. The next morning, she was gone. I felt like my world had crumbled. I missed her so much, and I didn't know how to go on without her. Chapter 6: Carrying Her Love with Me. Losing my grandma was the hardest thing I ever had to go through. But even though she's no longer here, I still feel her with me every day. I carry her love, her lessons, and her strength with me. Whenever I cook, I remember her teaching me how to bake cookies. Whenever I see a garden, I think of the flowers we planted together. And whenever I face a hard time, I remember her words. With love and patience, beautiful things grow. My grandma taught me that love is the greatest gift we can give. And even though she's not here anymore, her love lives on in me. I am who I am today because of her, and I will always be grateful for everything she gave me.